All right. I think we are in right now, but right now there's no viewers, so we'll just let people kind of casually
For
drift
sure.
in.
For sure.
But let me just ask you, how's your weekend been so far?
Pretty good, all things considered. Still kind of getting resituated after being on vacation.
Yeah.
My girlfriend and I, with her family, went on vacation to Colombia. So it's just like the first time I've been there. Wonderful,
Oh.
wonderful country, beautiful culture and everything. It was just the food is one of the best things.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and just like going to spend time with her family was the highlight of the whole thing. So
Wait a minute. This might seem ignorant of me, but I know Colombia mountains is now basically winter transitioning into spring down there.
that I don't know. So I was in like two different regions. One was like Neva, which is where her family kind of grows up, and it's really hot, tropical weather and everything like that. But then you have like cities like Bogota and Medellin, and those are more mountainous regions. Medellin, I'm told, is like springtime all throughout the year.
Oh, really?
Whereas like Bogota is like very cold, like it's not cold, but like sweater weather all the time. So
Gotcha.
yeah. So we were in those two areas, Bogota and Neva. So two different climates. One of them is Bogota is all in the mountains. So it was just a completely different playing field from what I'm used to. That's for sure.
To me, I love mountains. And so and I've never been to Colombia, but when thinking about places in the world that I have not been, Colombia, Peru, and Chile and Argentina are high on the list. I mean, Patagonia, that's something that I'd love to do at some point in my life. The Andes would be great.
I really want to go back at some point because it was a big family trip. So we got to meet a lot of family, but not a lot of exploring around the country. So next time I want to go to Medellin and Cali and all these other areas of Colombia, just to explore and get to know the country a little bit more. So
that's great. Well, hey, people are checking in now. We've been live for about 2 minutes. And so this is the Acid Horizon Research Commons live stream. And I'm still kind of a novice on the live stream with the controls. Like right now, we look kind of far away. Well, now we're close again. And there's the course. If you're tuning in to listen to Jeremy, and we're probably going to wrap light on non-philosophy tonight, but I definitely want listeners to get a sense of what Jeremy has to offer when you spend 4 weeks with him starting on October 8th. One of the reasons that we picked Jeremy was not only is he a good friend of the podcast, but he's essentially an expert in an area of philosophy that is adjacent to interest areas of our own on the podcast. But also, Jeremy is capable of offering this sort of unique course and maybe even series of courses on Laruelle's non-philosophy. And given the I would say the intensity and rigor of Laruelle's writing and his ideas and their novelty, there's no one better than Jeremy to do it. And it would be great to do it in a sustained format that doesn't burn you out, just like 1 month, or at least in 1 month clusters. And, let's try it out and let's see, how many people are really interested in non-philosophy. And I'll say, there's already several people in the course, and actually everybody who received a scholarship from us so far has picked Jeremy's course. So that's exciting news. Yeah.
That's very exciting.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, if you can get Jeremy's time for free, I mean, that's great. He's going to interact with you in, basically a classroom or a seminar setting. And I have sat in about half of Grafton Tanner's classes, and it's been just such a great vibe. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the kind of transition that Acid Horizon is in right now is that we now have a sort of we've become an attractor. We have eyes on us enough, and we have a lot of guests and scholars and researchers and translators that are in our broader assemblage. to whom, we want to give the opportunity to share our platform. And we thought the Acid Horizon Research Commons was a great way to do it and to keep our podcast sustainable. So everybody who's listening right now, just want to say thank you for listening. If you haven't listened to our episode today, The Politics of Ghosting with Dominic Petman, it's one of the most interesting episodes that I've had in a long time. It was just such a great discussion to have. And even listening back as I edited it, it was just a whole lot of fun. But Jeremy, I want to introduce you to the audience. I'm sure that there's some people listening who know you already, but maybe you can just give a brief introduction to yourself, your background. And I'm not sure if we ever really discussed in depth how you got into the work of Laruelle and what got you on that track.
Okay. All right. So, hello, everybody. My name is Jeremy. I have my doctorate in theory and criticism from the University of Western Ontario here in London, Ontario. Currently, I am both, while doing the work with Craig and Acid Horizon this year, I'm both a high school English teacher and also adjunct lecturer for sociology at Western. Where I come from, I'm from New York City, and I moved up to London in 2018 when I started here at Western, and I've been here since. I have a background in media and cultural studies. Surprisingly enough, hearing the name Dominic Petman is quite familiar to me. I actually had the opportunity to meet and talk with him when I was an undergrad at the New School many years ago. And I have my bachelor's from the New School, Eugene Lang College, in culture and media there, and my master's at NYU Steinhardt in with media, culture, and communication. So basically, I've come from like an adjacent scholarly approach to philosophy, mainly due to the fact that typical philosophy programs, as mainly could be seen in the United States, it's not particularly dealing with what we would have theory or continental philosophy that we're most known to see. Instead, these kinds of subfields or subdisciplines that are also interdisciplinary in a way, such as like media and cultural studies, you kind of are infected and also surrounded by a lot of these interdisciplinary approaches to the studies of these theorists. So I would say, before I was very into non-philosophy and kind of like gravitated towards it through an actual study and whatnot, I had been very interested in your typical run-of-the-mill Acid Horizon episode kind of like material. George Bataille, Gilles Deleuze, Felix Guattari, Foucault, and so on and so forth. And, at the time in New York City, I think, I had been surrounded by people like Dominic Petman, but also like Eugene Thacker and Alexander Galloway and Mackenzie Wark. And these theorists were very much a part of what would be kind of considered dealing with contemporary French philosophy, but also trying to think about its placement in problematics of critiquing capitalism today. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this relationship to movements like speculative realism, object-oriented ontology, and so on and so forth came up in my radar based on that milieu, that environment that I was in. And Laruelle was a name that kind of popped up a couple of times. So much so that like, I think there was a seminar held that I was introduced to by Mackenzie Wark, where it had Alexander Galloway and Eugene Thacker and a couple of other people kind of hosting this seminar on reading Laruelle's work in connection to problematics of mysticism, of poetry, capitalism, and so on and so forth. This was called Dark Nights of the Universe. It's like a collection that you can find, and they have a translation of one of Laruelle's poems called On the Black Universe. And for me, I was gravitating towards it a lot through those coincidences. And I had also worked at this Barnes & Noble on 15th and 8th Avenue, 15th Street and 8th Avenue. I think this was the oldest Barnes & Noble, the first Barnes & Noble. And it got closed down after I like a Valentine's Day in 2014 or something like that. I can remember the date, but I remember like walking through there and seeing the philosophy section and seeing On a Spine univocal. And my first thought in my mind is like, oh, univocal. This is some Deleuze related concept. Interesting. And there's a couple of books there by like Michel Serres, Gilbert Simondon's book on 2 Lessons on Man and Animal. And then I see Laruelle. I see Struggle and Utopia at the End Times of Philosophy, and I see Philosophy and Non-Philosophy. And these the names for the translators started picking up. Drew Burke, Anthony Paul Smith, Rocco Gangle, Taylor Atkins, who's also on Machinic Unconscious, Happy Hour. Like, these are people that now I have a better connection with over time, dealing with the work of Laruelle. And, you know, I picked up Philosophy and Non-Philosophy, and admittedly, I really did not like the book until I kind of like delved deeper into the scholarship at the time. You know, I wanted to be convinced. I wanted to be won over. So I would read people like Galloway. I would read John O'Malerica's All Thoughts Are Equal. I'd read the work of Katerina Kolozova, who wrote The Cut of the Real. Like, all of these figures that had secondary work out there, I devour it all and just get very interested in it. And, you know, Laruelle's work and so on, and this kind of field of non-philosophy was in the background of my studies. It was more of a hobby or an interest until maybe around 2018, when I came to Western and also started Araxium officially with the first issue. I became more invested in trying to explore some of the work in Laruelle. So long story short, like I kind of had a very rough patch of a beginning to deal with this work. And the more I gravitated towards it over the years and dedicated my time for my dissertation to look at a holistic account of non-philosophy through like both the published work and translated work and the untranslated work, and to try to paint a big picture of that, allowed for me to appreciate the work in a new light. And here I am today, feeling confident as ever to kind of think about this as an opportunity for people who are either interested in just getting into the program or feeling dejected by that kind of like first attempt, maybe listening to a podcast or two with me in it and just being like, nah, I don't want to listen to this anymore. I don't want to read it. It sounds like I need a lot of knowledge or whatever. But my intent going into this, you know, as what I've done, hopefully for my dissertation, is to provide like a gloss of an introduction in a way, to try to situate people into the program and kind of work with what could be done with non-philosophy.
Yeah. So I remember the first time that I read Laruelle was before I met you. I did have an encounter with the Utopia book, but my second encounter with Laruelle was the essays on heresy that we get from the Urbanomic collection of essays. And I think that was our first episode together, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And I have to say, you know, there is something in philosophy where, especially it happens in continental philosophy. We've often talked about on the podcast how it's so easy to be Oedipalized by one's favorite thinkers and then get sort of corralled into a set of concepts that then makes it difficult for us to think beyond that frame. And I would say amongst the philosophers that I've encountered since my my long-term relationship with like Nietzsche and Deleuze and Guattari and that sort of thing, I will definitely say Laruelle gave me a jostle. And the first time it wasn't comfortable. And I would say it really wasn't until we did our episode on mysticism on Left Hand that I really got a sense of like, I see the value in Laruelle's work now, because what it's doing is it's actually interrogating the primacy of philosophy against life, right? And that which, is an excess and cannot be circumscribed by thought. And, discovering a discourse in Laruelle's work, which allows us to talk about that, which, on the one hand, I think honors something that we find in Deleuze and his relationship to thought and thought's relationship to other domains of, creation and expression. But then with the Laruelle, I think we get, a kind of unique segue to this other way of thinking about thought. And that's what I appreciated about, the multiple episodes, multiple interviews that I've had with you. With that said, I would just say this course that we're doing here, the Rebellious Postulates course, who would you say this course is for? Because, we have many people who've been listeners on the, of our show for, since its inception 5 years ago. There are people who are just signing on for the first time. There are folks who are just getting into this milieu of discourse and reading, maybe over the past 6 months or so. What would somebody stand to learn? What is the provocation that one would encounter in this course, Rebellious Postulates, and who would benefit from it, in your opinion?
Okay, so I can't give the Nietzsche answer that it's for everyone and no one, that's for sure. But I think what I'd like to start off with is that I know that I have a presence online, and I have made it my goal to be present for anybody who is curious about non-philosophy. I've made translations readily accessible through my blog, and have done so for a number of years now. And I'd like for those who are listening in to, like, if they're considering this option, to recognize that a lot of this labor that I've done has kind of been like out of pure curatorial purposes and trying to like instigate interest in the first place. So there's a lot of material to draw from in this respect. And instead of kind of being inundated with that long list of translations that are readily available, this course will be designed specifically with that genealogical, historical, conceptual account that goes from just dealing with problematics first, like introducing ourselves to what non-philosophy is, some of the key concepts, unilateral duality, vision in one or vision in man, or the determination of last instance, and going from different problematics that would, for instance, deal with, let's say, his earliest writings from what we would call Philosophy 1, including the text Nietzsche contra Heidegger, which we discussed a brief overview with Jacob Van Geest a couple of years ago, Beyond the Power Principle, Textual Machines, and what I call the Twilight of Writing. And these books still have not been translated properly. I have drafts of them for sure. And the drafts are obviously done with the purpose of scholarly intent, but also at the same time, if the interest is there, I have that resource available for people to go and generate that kind of conversation. But I also kind of, for the most part, want to delineate what non-philosophy is and try to figure out why is it that Laruelle tries to instigate a sort of break from his contemporaries that are dealing with desire, power, and its unity, and the relationship between the sort of continuum that is established between multiplicities and the technological aspects of thought, and try to break from that machinic consequences of thought towards something Laruelle deems human philosophy, and trying to interrogate the differentiation between the homo ex machina, the man that is in the machine, with that of the ordinary man. And all of these concepts that Laruelle is critical of, that a lot of secondary work, needless to say, does not explore. And I want to allow for that kind of scholarly engagement to that perspective to be offered to students and to be offered to the audience itself. And this is the first of 3 clusters. So like I already have 2 more clusters already planned. And these clusters, I envision them also taking in place of like 4 weeks as well. This first set is just dealing with how do we start from non-philosophy and where do we go with it? So not only is it just focusing on these first 3, what is non-philosophy, dealing with the Nietzschean writings and the break into human philosophy, but also dealing with non-epistemology and first science and transcendental science, the things that are explored in a lot of the approaches in later works. The other clusters that I have planned would deal with non-politics or non-Marxism in particular, non-ethics, non-theology, non-psychoanalysis, all these nons that are already there. And I think the second cluster will be a useful tool for having students work with my upcoming translation of Theory of Strangers, which deals with the problematics of, theory, the non-political and non-psychoanalytic approaches. So,
hey, before you go on, Jeremy, is it possible to get a review copy of that?
That I can work some like ideas in, and I'll put a word out for you for that. So,
so that way we can have you on for that. Well, I just want to highlight the fact that there's already questions coming in for this impromptu AMA. And if you are listening to us right now, feel free to lodge questions in the chat for Jeremy about Laruelle, about his upcoming class. Let's start with Laura. Laura, maybe you know Laura. I don't know. Hi, Dr. Smith. Just a question. How does Laruelle's non-philosophy differ from other variations of non-philosophy that already exist?
Okay. So, this really puts me on the spot here because Laura's a big fan of my work. She's my girlfriend. So unfortunately, I did not plant her in the audience. It just so happens to be of the essence here. So how does Laruelle's non-philosophy differ from other variations of non-philosophy that already exist? So this is going to be a very long-winded response, but I think a way of envisioning this question is to try to think about what philosophy does in its very operation. According to Laruelle, in the work of philosophy, philosophers autoposit itself and its representation of other conceptual entities, whether it be the human being or being itself or the concepts of the real and the unknown, the different or the other. And what happens is these are treated as the non-philosophical or the not yet philosophical concepts, still intra-philosophically engaged. So it becomes more or less a vicious circle with regards to these concepts. There's no outside of philosophy in that respect. However, with Laruelle, who is indebted to the kind of Althusserian and Deleuzian traditions of thinking, is trying to think of something that precedes the sort of delineation of philosophy and its other, or the sort of like circular relationship that that approaches this problem. And the genuine non-philosophical, the real non-philosophical, is something that is impossible to be treated philosophically, and renders the sort of relationship not secondarized, but unilateralized. Philosophy becomes more or less a separate sphere from which the non-philosopher can extract statements and treat it in a new light. So through that relationship, it becomes less so of the question of making so non-philosophy is a part of the same circle that that has this conceptual other intraphilosophically engaging or affecting it from within and outside of it. It's trying to think not of this radical outside, but a radical immanence that includes philosophy, but is completely not, how do I put this, completely foreclosed in a way that is unreflected immanence. So the non-philosophical here is not void, but full of itself without a sort of emptiness that is precluded by the void of ontology or anything of the sort. So hopefully, Laura Arbelaya's BA, that answers your question.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. And like I said, this is kind of an AMA of sorts, so feel free to lodge your comments or questions in here. Somebody put a funny one, non-girlfriend. That's kind of good.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, here's a question for you. Actually, I'm going to scale things back a little bit, and let's just talk about philosophy itself, the enterprise of philosophy, the discipline, the practice, the activity of it. And on Left Hand recently, well, maybe a few months ago, I put out a short video on what I considered to be my top 5 reading strategies. You know, we live in an age where we're just absolutely challenged to maintain a consistent and continuous stream of attention on our books and our work and that sort of thing. And it's no secret that Deleuze and Laruelle, and who else can we throw in here? I mean, gosh,
Derrida,
yeah, Lyotard, all of those. You know, these are very difficult thinkers. I mean, literally taking months, if not years sometimes, to really kind of, you know, get fully, what's the word that I want to use? Immersed and like almost like broiled in, you know, like anybody can go out and get a tan, but to really get these concepts baked into you, you know, takes time and a lot of basting besides. But what for you, like, what is your approach to just like reading, studying, keeping tabs on these ideas, developing your own ideas, building out a translation? Like I'm sure there's some folks who are listening right now who might be curious about taking your course, but might feel a little bit daunted about well, should I jump into this graduate level course? What are some strategies that you recommend?
I recommend not going down the path that I took. That's the one thing. For me, like, the reason why I say that is because it took me a very long time, and I'm trying to rethink the practice of what I've done and try to think about that for the next person who would probably follow through on that. And I say this with, you know, the kind of experience that I've had in, you know, doing grad school and going through my PhD and everything like that. It is treacherous and, you know, dangerous to deal with that kind of relationship in scholarly fields, and it becomes such a difficult time to like work through these processes in like isolation and by yourself. So there's a whole difference that I'd like to kind of like engage within this course. And I don't want to think of it as like a glorified reading group. That's not what it is, or a book club. Instead, like, I want us to easily get into the nitty gritty, which is like, what is it about these terms that Laruelle is using that I could see happening in another work? One of the consequences that I've had, or comments that I've had from most of these podcasts that I've been on with you and others is like, well, it seems like I need to know philosophy in order to know non-philosophy. Right? And my perspective is, I don't think you really do. I don't think you have to have that kind of perspective to come in and deal with non-philosophy with all of this knowledge of Plato, Kant, or Heidegger, or Derrida, Deleuze, or anything like that. Instead, I would like us to start from Laruelle and try to read backwards retroactively and try to think of it in a way that like is productive rather than like negational. Because I feel like a lot of the work that's out there nowadays that puts Laruelle into conversation with a lot of thinkers, it's usually like, here's this thinker. I'm going to compare Laruelle to this thinker and show how Laruelle makes this person better. And I think that that's a problem because it doesn't actually help readers digest the work in the way that we could appreciate and see where we can go with this. For me, in my study, I had to read for my comprehensive exams 10,000 pages of philosophy from Plato onwards. And was it fun? Absolutely not. Still got passed with distinction, but that doesn't mean anything, right? But my point is, like, when it comes to these circumstances of readership and scholarship, it's completely different when we are going through the ringer and trying to work through the content as if it was for the first time. And what I'd like to go in with is a sense of naivete that allows for readers to look at this in a way that's like, okay, I don't know anything about Deleuze. I'm going to read Laruelle and try to think about what's going on here, and then go to Deleuze or Derrida or whoever to try to like see how it runs up against this, but also not to make like a compare and contrast or juxtaposition or kind of like a new way of like, I want it to be a new way of reading, a new way of like engaging with this material. So much so that like non-philosophy should be the introductory prism of these works. For me to go back like to this like experience that I've had, I think for the time that I was in my doctorate, you're spending time with the work intimately every day, translating 10 to 15 pages and trying to like put that into exegetical accounts that when you're writing a dissertation, you're not writing for an everyday audience. You're not writing for the audience that is going to be in this group. You're writing specifically for the 5 or 6 people on your dissertation committee who are all going to like either embarrass you in a small portion, or they're going to be like, I need you to elaborate upon this further. Dissertation is never written for other people. It's not written for everyday people. It's not written for like people that we engage with on podcasts. And podcasts, the podcast form that I've been on with you and Acid Horizon and Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour and anything else that I've been on, I can say for a fact that podcasts are like, they're not scripted. They're on the spot. And a lot of these on the spot things are very hard.
Yeah.
You know, and when we're dealing with like courses, it's going to be very different because I am very excited for those moments of like, wait, what the fuck does he mean by this? And try to like deal with those problems intimately. Because I want my students to be like very curious and naive about their knowledge and try to think of it in a way that's less so about, I need to know all these things in advance, but how do I think about what these things are in another light? So.
Right. I have a few things to say about that. And then also I want to address some of the comments that are coming in as well. I mean, I'll just say something about the podcast form. I mean, for a long time, I wasn't involved in philosophy. I was, basically undertaking a career as a musician and just reading on the side. And if anything, maybe I struggled too with being able to articulate my ideas clearly. One thing that actually really helped me was becoming an ESL teacher.
Yes.
That really and you know this. We have a very similar. Well, if we fold it up like a piece of origami, we have a similar career path. But I think for me, like, I mean, I listen to podcasts and so forth, but then to host a podcast and beyond podcasts, it really introduces you to a sense of what the, like the Greek agora or the forum might have been like, because even though, and then it also raises the question of what is philosophy yet again, because, one might make the argument that we live in an age where the image of traditional academia is in decline, and certainly not by its own, internalized forces, but that I think some of that is there. Somebody put a comment up like continuing the game of inside baseball. This is a problem in some respects for non-academics and academics alike, but it's seen as a kind of necessary evil in terms of strengthening the crucible that allows us to produce people who are experts in certain areas, right? But anyway, yeah, all that to say is that I appreciate the podcast form because it's given me a way to just develop my ability to express myself and interlocute with people like you. A quick commercial before we move on. Somebody asked me off topic, do you know when the Vintagia Oracle deck is coming out, and how is it coming along? Well, here's the thing. As I understand it, it's in the mail on the way to my house right now. So the Acephalus deck and the Vintagia deck, these tarot decks that I've created, Vintagia is kind of a weird one. Once people get this deck, they're really going to find out what it's all about. But they are on the way, and hopefully I will be sending them out maybe Thursday or Friday, or sometime this weekend if I receive them in the next 2 days or so. So I just wanted to say that to folks who are listening. There's a question that I was going to ask you, Jeremy, but Louisa C. asked the question. Hello, Dr. Smith. How might non-philosophy be applied outside of academia? For example, in art, activism, or psychology? Where does the rubber meet the road with non-philosophy? And I'll say, I'll come in after your comment, but I think I kind of got it, or it clicked for me somewhat once we had our episode on mysticism, but I also used Laruelle for our book Antioculus too. But anyway, I'll, of course, give us your answer, Dr. Smith.
Just call me Jeremy, everybody. This is just like, I think the Dr. Smith thing, this is reserved for my students in high school or whoever I meet to. Like, I feel like Shebek from The Dispossessed, the book I'm teaching, ironically enough. I'm just like, just call me Jeremy, please. How might it be applied outside of academia? I think partially, we have to look at what is being asked for in non-philosophy. As I understand it, and as I've kind of found from the work of Laruelle in particular, is that one of the things that's important, especially in regards to non-philosophy, is the use of these statements or use of these works, use of philosophy for one's needs. And this is embraced in an essay. I actually just translated this today for the course called Invent Philosophy. It's a whole programmatic vision of what to do with non-philosophy and where it's going to go. So I could summarize this with two slogans Laruelle used in his work. Man is not made for philosophy, and philosophy is made for man. And non-philosophy is the introduction of democracy into thought. And I think for what it's worth, it's inseparable to deal with non-philosophy and people. And art, activism, psychology in particular, these are the three things in this comment that are all intimately bound with people. Art is specifically the representation of reality in a way that presses into everybody's unconscious in a way that gives that emotive appeal, the pathos related to it. Activism is all about how people deal with the inhumanity of other people, and largely broadly just trying to change and force people to be free in the Rousseauian way. And psychology, at least in psychoanalysis, it's to try to get to that unconscious to demonstrate this is who you are. And in all of these instances, the intimate human experience is at the forefront. What I find to be very important for non-philosophy, at least for me, in a broad outside para-academic space, is to try to think of philofiction, which is one of the methods that Laruelle introduces, as a tool for inventing new practices for thought. And the very word of practice implies that this is supposed to be outside of an intellectual circle jerk in a way. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, at least, when I first started this, and I really did not like the high level of abstraction that was going on, it made me lose sight of what exactly was at the kernel of the work itself. One thing is that you have two different forms of critique that goes on, or positive and negative projects of non-philosophy. I think a lot of people are very interested in the negative project of non-philosophy, which is the critique and the science of philosophy. That's a negative project. Like, you can't say, like, we can probably make the real say infinitely effable things about the real and whatever. The positive project is the democratic side of things. What do people do with this work in a way that makes it so that they can transform the world? And I think a lot of the work that Laruelle has done is from Laruelle's perspective. What I would like to do is try to extract some of these methodical approaches that we have in these works, whether they be, for example, the use of psychoanalytic material in Lacan and Freud and Theory of Strangers, to try to think about how that could be intimately tapped into the unconscious of everyday people, or to use the books on aesthetics and try to think about how to utilize this for art. And also the political aspects, whether it be the books on non-Marxism or even the notion of democracy related to activism in a way. These are the things that I would love to explore as possible. It's not only relegated to academic work. I think one of the downsides with existing scholarship or even existing practice is that there is a sort of academic gatekeeping that goes on. And I find, and I've tried really hard to kind of eliminate that entirely through what I do, translating and being present. So I'm definitely encouraged these kinds of conversations in the class.
I'm going to grab something here, and I want you to indulge me for a minute. Hold on one second. It's on my bookshelf. Mm-hmm. All right. First off, what I'm about to show you guys, do not buy this book. This is Anti-Oculus, A Philosophy of Escape by Acid Horizon. There's plenty of places online where you can find this gratis. Get it there and keep the boycott up. But anyway, I wanted to just go to one of the sections of Anti-Oculus that I worked on. And I would say that, where is it here? I just want to quote myself correctly. Where did it go? Because Laruelle, for the chapter that I was most invested in Anti-Oculus, Laruelle is not held up as the key figure, but really it was a thought inspired by Laruelle, which basically this whole chapter came from. And gosh, where the heck is it? Anyway, I can say it. I can do it without reading it. So, Laruelle says that about philosophy, and let's get the verbiage right here, is that one of the problems with philosophy and history is that it's come to insinuate itself anywhere thought is enacted, right? It becomes the sort of dominant image of thought, right? And Jeremy, why can I not think of the line right now? What does
the capital form of thought? Is that what you're thinking of?
How did I forget that? How did I forget that? Yes, that philosophy is the capital form of thought. And I have not read Laruelle on psychoanalysis, but a thought that had come to mind with my sustained engagement with James Hillman's work is that psychoanalysis becomes the capital form of image in the imagination, right? I would gather, based on what I know about Laruelle, is that view is probably pretty close to what he thinks, even without having read him. And that became the sort of basis for the political manifesto, if you will, that is Antioculus, which is when it comes to imagining a new politics, imagining a new world, and also making sense of the sort of tortured images that we live with in our world. We sometimes, I think it's incumbent upon us to look beyond the frame of available frameworks in order to create the world in a way, or resist the current world, refuse the current state of things, such that, our lives are returned back to us, or a sense of ourselves that lies outside of the frame of philosophy, psychoanalysis, politics, and what have you, comes back to us. And it seems that in a world just so fraught with frameworks, institutions, and what have you, it's almost as if that thought in advance has been foreclosed upon by philosophy with a capital P. I don't know if you can speak to that. Does any of that sound like what Laruelle is thinking about in terms of psychoanalysis, let's say?
Yeah, so I could speak on behalf of what I've translated for Theory of Strangers. Make sure you pre-order. It's with Edinburgh University Press, coming out in January of this coming year. The whole third chapter of the book, I don't recommend also just jumping to this chapter. Everybody, in my translator's introduction, I make it clear that you should not be jumping from point A immediately to point C. Because I think you need to get the terminology and to think about the larger problematics that are present in the work. Anyway, so the third chapter of this book, split into two, is dealing with what Laruelle would call, or does call, a unified theory of philosophy and psychoanalysis. And in particular, it's not just that, you can't necessarily just provide a critique of through anti-Oedipus. You have to do something more than that. You have to de-philosophize the unconscious as well. So there's a sort of complex that's deeply rooted, using these terms, called the philo-analytic complex, where statements regarding the unconscious are only structured in this kind of perspective, according to philosophy and psychoanalysis combined. And there could be a lot of debate, and there has been a lot of debate, surrounding psychoanalysis and its relationship to philosophy, being considered an anti-philosophical discipline at times, and then also at the same time embedded in the philosophical tradition in a way. But I don't think Laruelle is interested in this debate internally to this kind of portion of the book, but in particular trying to think about a non-analytic cure of the philo-analytic complex that's impacting the unconscious of human experience. And in this way, it's kind of going beyond the kind of distriangulation of mommy, daddy, me, of the Oedipal complex, and trying to think about the kind of philosophical triangulation that occurs in the unconscious mind. Laruelle introduces a lot of different terminology in this kind of portion. And I wouldn't want to recapitulate it here, but the ideas that are present in this chapter particularly are dealing with what he would call, and does call, a universal unconscious. And now this universal unconscious is actually void or emptied of the kind of images of philosophy and psychoanalysis as like experiences. And rather than like treating it as like a vessel through which the machinations of desire can come about, it's rather that these interpretations of human minds could be explored with the help of philosophical and psychoanalytic statements, rather than being them suffice to describe the unconscious of the human. So in this way, this universal unconscious is less like a collective unconscious and more or less like a subject of humanity that is completely emptied of any contents. There's a lot.
Can I stop you right there? Once again, do not buy this book, but in the particular chapter that I'm talking about, Acid Horizon has a similar concept, the imageless image. When we think about, and this is interesting now I have to grab Laruelle's work on this. And this is, you said, In Theory of Strangers?
Yeah, so it's coming out in January. I'll see if I can get you a review copy.
Yeah, no, because the concept, I was trying to articulate a problem. Like, how is it, for example, like, let's think about psychology and just psychic experience, psychological phenomenon, whether it be dreams, reveries, complexes, what have you. Already, with the kinds of language that I'm using, we're already embedded in that sort of like philo-psychological world, or the philo-analytic world. And all of those terms, as I see it, already kind of have a metaphysical purchase on something that is psychological. And this is one thing that I take from James Hillman too, is that our encounter with psyche is often mediated by not only the clinical language and what have you, but also by the metaphysical presuppositions that undergird the frameworks through which we are having these experiences or these encounters. And so I thought, this has impacts for politics as well. We need a concept through which to think, an image through which we think the involution of all images, including the image of thought that pegs down our interpretations of the psyche. So I don't know if any of that sort of rhymes with Laruelle, but like I'm getting a sense that there's something useful in him for me.
Yeah, I think I'm not really doing it justice right now with regards to like the book itself. But for what it's worth, the third chapter on psychoanalysis is a great portion of that book. And it's probably one of the most difficult portions without the context of the first two chapters dealing with the critique of the human sciences and philosophical anthropology and even political philosophy in the second chapter. So a lot of these kinds of conversations that are found at the forefront of psychoanalysis are buttressed by the other conversations related to an adequate concept of humanity and an adequate concept of democracy, or the power of people in general. So a lot of the conversations that could be had with regards to this third chapter are very much going to be supported by these perspectives, to say the least. Oh, Craig, I can't.
There. Yeah. Sorry about that. We have one more question from Laura. How does psychoanalysis intersect with non-philosophy, and in what other ways do their frameworks resist or fail to align with one another? I think we've covered some of this, but maybe is there any way to sort of polish this issue off?
So I think one of the ways in which we could think of this kind of connection is also found in a lot of the works on criticizing the intellectual, the figure of the intellectual, and in particular, a lot of these connections that Laruelle would identify as a philosopher's resistance to non-philosophy. Why is it that, like, proposing these ideas, why is it that his peers don't seem to, like, agree with the program? What is it that they're trying to see in him that is, for example, like Derrida would call him a terrorist? And why is it that, like, these kinds of dynamics of resistance to the whole program are found in that place? Psychoanalysis deals with resistance as well. Like, why is it that we resist to identify, the analyzing's kind of approach to their problems, or resisting the actual functions of the unconscious, or like accepting the reality of what it is? And part of that also comes into play with the philosophers themselves. Why is it that they cannot force themselves to be freed from the sort of constraints of their own system? Why is it that they have to see themselves as part of that tradition, as opposed to, like, being united with humanity in a way, or forced to be free in the general will, in the Rousseauian sense? But there's a saying that I'm going to connect this to with a very popularized approach to a lot of secondary work in non-philosophy. There's people that go out there and say Laruelle should not be the next best thing, right? The next big thing. We don't need another, like, figurehead of a whole discipline to be idolized and fetishized and treated as, like, another French philosopher, right? And I agree. I totally agree. But there's another thing about this, that they get these ideas from an interview that is held between him and other secondary scholars in a volume called Laruelle and Non-Philosophy. And in this instance, there's a saying that he says, Laruelle does not exist. Like a very, like, silly sentence to say. And people take that and run with it. But I think that we miss the other portions of that same paragraph, and I take it seriously. It's that Laruelle doesn't like to, or didn't like to, identify himself with the tradition. In fact, he rebelled against it several times and provided a way of thinking whether or not it was right to rebel against philosophers, in the same vein as, like, being right to rebel against reactionaries. And in this way, there's all of these perspectives that Laruelle is programmatically dealing with. But instead of identifying with a tradition, he identifies with this distorted mediation known as humankind. And Laruelle is just one support, or one basis by which this image could be seen. But it's not related to that. The intellectuals and the philosophers, they tend to hold their moral, political, ethical presuppositions as the basis from which they are going to develop their own system. Rather, for Laruelle, it's that kind of radical humanity that is the basis through which that resistance is trying to be demolished, or to challenge that through that resistance. So I hope that answers the question, Laura Arbelay's BA.
Great. Well, a few things. I have been flashing the name of this course on the screen throughout. Laruelle's Non-Philosophy, Rebellious Postulations. This is the very first semester of Acid Horizon Research Commons. A lot of people who missed the boat with getting into a class early this fall, the latecomers, or people who are just waiting for Jeremy's class, you'll be able to start on October 8th. And do people use QR codes anymore? Man, I have one flashed up here. So if you're watching this now, you can just screenshot it and then register later, or register now as you're listening. And what you'll get once you register is access to, I think you get the syllabus. I think there's automatic access to the Google Classroom as well. And that will get you the reading list. And so you can get reading before class starts. And
let me just add just very quickly, most, if not all, of the content is readily available to pick up and read at any time. So if there's anything of interest, you can get a jump on it. I don't have the recommended readings like Deleuze, Derrida, or Heidegger or whatever. That's something that anybody can pick up just through a normal, DuckDuckGo search or whatever, and you can get it there. But if you would like, we could have those kind of discussions in advance, like try to get like a conversation going well before the actual class begins.
An interesting question just came in. Edgar asks, why would a scientist be interested in Laruelle, particularly someone coming from a STEM background?
Okay, that's actually very good. So I could talk about his wife, Anne-Françoise Schmid. Anne-Françoise Schmid is an epistemologist and somebody who works at Mines Paris Tech in Paris. And a lot of what she does is focus on the relationship between philosophy, the arts, and sciences. And Laruelle and Anne-Françoise worked together for their whole lives together. And they shared an office together and were dealing with these problematics together in a way that was very useful. I'll talk about Anne-Françoise first because myself and two other translators, Bryn McNabb and Luka Stojanovic, we've been working on this translation of her book with Muriel Membrini-Dudet. That we had a contract with another publisher that didn't fall through. So we're trying to find an alternative publisher out there. So publishers listening in, maybe this would be of interest to you. But generic epistemology, the book kind of proposes a whole new way of conceiving of the contemporary field of science studies and epistemology, and trying to think about why is it that we are using a category of philosophy from the use of early mechanics to describe our understanding of epistemological relationships. In fact, Anne-Françoise has an essay called An Interdisciplinarity Without Metaphysics, wherein she criticizes why we are using epistemology as a term from the 18th century, and we're still using that terminology when there are new ways of conceiving of these relationships of knowledge and sciences in general to the real object of any sort of study. And with generic epistemology, there's a whole new keyword of like rethinking these interdisciplinary approaches that allows for a democratic relationship between disciplines to arise, rather than like, for example, a philosophy of science or a philosophy of physics or a philosophy of any sort of discipline to kind of like monopolize that perspective. And the generic approach allows for all of these methodologies to kind of meet in a kind of matrixial relationship and extract all of that information to try to reconceive of those dynamics without one discipline having domination over another. So in a way, scientists could be interested in using this approach in particular to deal with a variety of different disciplines to work with one another, to deal with integrative objects or complex objects such as climate change these days. I know in this one book in particular, generic epistemology, they're interested in fish farming and how fish farming in France is always connected to industry and GMOs and fishes themselves, and like having all of these different accounts of the whole process of what goes into a genetically modified organism, and trying to deal with these problems from all of these different perspectives: ethics, politics, industry, etc., and trying to rethink about that model and way of conceiving these relationships and knowledge. Now, with Laruelle, this is a whole other story. So he has two books in particular that I look to for, him dealing with science itself. And one is called Theory of Identities, and the other is Introduction to Generic Sciences. Introduction to Generic Sciences, I did a bootleg translation of this back in like 2017, 2018. You can ask me for it. I don't really like the translation. It's a bad one. This is something that I did very early on. Very similar in approach to what Anne-Françoise is approaching in this work. In particular, trying to think about different terminology of genericity. And genericity as a term is also found in the work of Alain Badiou and a number of other thinkers in the tradition of like Feuerbach, for example. And trying to think about a new epistemological relationship to arise from this operator of the generic. And Laruelle allows for this to be less of a domineering science or pilot science and more of a underdetermining discipline that allows for all of these different scientific approaches to be relegated to this shared basis, a generic basis. For theory of identities, though, and it's more or less an experimental work, I think it goes over my head at times, but it only makes sense for me, at least, when I think about the work of Edward Burko, who is this fractal artist from the 1990s and is very influential. And Laruelle's got an essay on his work in the concept of non-photography. Anyway, in this book, he's trying to rethink the way in which epistemology is structured in existing philosophical discourse. So much so that like the conceptualization of determination in the last instance that he repeatedly draws from all throughout his work is used as a specific causality to think of the relationship between a real object and the theory of the object. And any theory that is worthy of the name science, according to Laruelle, is deemed a non-thetic representation of the real. It is kind of a mirror without a reflection, to use like the Althuserian phrase. And trying to be as rigorous a description of that real object without a sort of circular reciprocity of a thing. Now, he uses the way in which of envisioning a fractal model of description. And fractals are all self-similar and they unfold in chaotic dispersion. So instead of like a specific one-to-one relationship, like what would be in like dialectical materialism, where matter has to determine the form of the theory and the form of the theory has to be adequate to the matter, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. This fractal theory is kind of like more or less unfolding through this kind of infinite dispersion, infinite chaotic dispersion of infinite descriptions of what that real object could be like, but it does not suffice for that original point, as opposed to like a theory determining that. So that's a long way of thinking about Laruelle's relationship to science in that respect. But I would refer, like, Anne-Françoise Schmidt's work is more directly in line with the hard sciences and more or less the sciences, the contemporary sciences today. And her work is severely looking at, like, I try my hardest to make her work popular, and I want her work to also get the spotlight at some point in due time.
Great. Well, we've been going for over an hour now, Jeremy, and I'll just plug the class again. We were talking about Laruelle's Non-Philosophy, Rebellious Postulations, coming October 8th. Here is the QR code if you want to screenshot that so that you can log on and register. Register right now. It's Sunday night. Now's the night to do it. You don't want to wait until the first week. You want to give yourself some lead time and, you know, do the first set of readings if you can. But maybe just to wrap up, just on something totally different. There's several people listening right now, and people may not know that you were the person who introduced me to the game Hollow Knight, and then of course Silk Song, which is out now, which I have not purchased or downloaded yet, but you have and had limited contact with it. Let's talk Hollow Knight. What are your first impressions of Silk Song? Was it worth the wait?
Worth the wait and more. Let me just tell you, the announcement for that, the announcement for that was like a shadow drop, right? So I think Team Cherry put that notice out 2 weeks before it was going to be dropped. And like, I was just like, I need to get this. I know I need to get this. And then I noticed the price. It's $25 US. And I'm thinking to myself, yes, this is definitely like, you would imagine, like, because Team Cherry, when they put out Hollow Knight, the first game, it was, I think, $15 or $20. And you have all of this expansive content and free DLC and everything like that. I feel like I'm Team Cherry's hype man right now to talk about this. Not even more about Laruelle, just like Silk Song. Anyway, so this game, I think I downloaded it the day of. It took me 7 minutes to download, and I started playing, and I'm already enthralled. It's straight out of your Metroidvania like progression system. You need to get an upgrade in order to do all these things. But it's basically a whole new Hollow Knight game. So all the mechanics, everything is completely different. I found complete joy, just playing as Hornet and just like experiencing the world with her mechanics and everything so far. I'm still in Act 1. And I think I'm like maybe 15 to 20 hours in. So like that says a lot. There's 3 acts apparently. And I found that when it comes to these kinds of games, I want to immerse myself as much as possible before like I progress continuously. These are the kinds of games that I'm like, yeah, I will love to do the side quests and then I will continue. And Hollow Knight was just like the same. I think for me, like I loved doing the side quests and just getting all the upgrades before taking down the Hollow Knight and dying repeatedly to the Radiance and then trying my hand at the Pantheon and not doing well on those fronts. But it is such a joy to like come back to this because like, the Team Cherry is just fantastic. The art design and just the haptics. I play on the Switch. So cool. Like I like it's completely different. So like there's an area where there's all this rain and all you could feel on the controller is the light tat-tats like
oh wow, that's
rain
cool.
On the controller. And it's just like this has sold me even well before like actually going into these other areas. Because I love the lore of these games. I love the bugs. I hate the bugs in real life, but I love the bugs in the game. Right. And it's just, it's so lighthearted and I love it. Definitely recommend, Greg. Definitely recommend, audience. Definitely pick up your copy of Hollow Knight, Silk Song. I don't think you need to know about the first game to play this one. It's like isolated so far.
Yeah, I think you had introduced it to me after we first met, which was just a couple of months into the pandemic. And, for me, Hollow Knight was a way to pass the time. And how there was that weird shift in our sense of temporality with the pandemic. It like playing Hollow Knight actually allowed me to use a Deleuzian term, form a plane of consistency of sorts. Right. And so, for a long time we were waiting for Hollow Knight. And my wife, so, video games, it's a kind of vicarious experience, but there's many people out there who watch people play video games. I mean, that's streaming, right? My wife likes to watch me play. So then, of course, I feel the in-game pressure and then the backseat driver thing going on. But it's a wholesome family experience for us. And I might just wait until, first of all, we just have, like, you and I are building this course. That's just one of the things that I'm doing. I got these decks coming out, these live shows. I mean, Silk Song should be the last thing on my mind, but I'm actually thinking about downloading it tonight. Maybe
listen,
just get 10 minutes in before bed.
Yeah, I think if you just do the first area, you'll be satisfied. That's all it is. Like, like once you get through that little like peak moment, I don't want to spoil it for you, but like there's just like this magical feeling of entering a world.
Oh, nice.
Like,
that's why we do it. Yeah, that's exactly why we play it.
And you just are consistently going from the bottom and ascending up, and you just reach this part when you finish the first area that like it just sets the mood. It just sets the adventure going forward.
How many gigs is it? Do you know?
Oh, you'd be surprised. I actually don't know, but I think, it took like I said, it took me 7 minutes on the Switch to download.
All right.
It's surprising. It's a very big game, but like probably not big in gigs. That's that's what I'm thinking.
All right. I'm wondering if I could just play it off the external hard drive or not. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. But anyway, well, here's a perk. If you are a Hollow Knight or a Silk Song fan, and then you join up with Jeremy for Laruelle's Non-Philosophy Rebellious Postulations, maybe there's a side discussion about, I mean, hey, is there anything non-philosophical or non-dash about the Hollow Knight world or video games in general? Has there been any research on that? Is there a Laurel connection to Silk Song is really what I'm asking.
No, I mean, I don't think there is a Laurel connection to Silk Song. Listen, if I spend some time with it, maybe I'll think about how, maybe there is a connection to it. But no, I don't have an immediate thought about that. But, like I'm deep into Destiny too. Like I play that game every once in a while when it's not bugging out all the time. But it's one of those comfort games that I think for me, like science fiction and any fantasy genre storytelling is, for me at least, like enjoyable. Like everything that I teach at the high school level, like I mentioned before, I'm teaching the dispossessed. So these are things that I'm very excited about, like always with students, and the curiosity that like these worlds open up for new people. And like I said before, with non-philosophy, if you don't have any knowledge about like these philosophers, maybe you get that new radical opening, radical beginning of revisiting these thinkers in that prism, and it gives that sense of science fiction in a way that allows for more imaginative possibilities that were precluded. So these are things that I like to explore. Maybe there is a whole Silk Song relationship. We'll see.
Well, I'll say this too. Like I like to get my recommendations from the listeners and stuff too. Thinking of non-philosophy, there was a game that you could get on itch.io. I'm not a big gamer, but like I'll go through little spells, like 2 months long, where I'll just get immersed in a game. And it was actually at the beginning of the pandemic when I downloaded one of the big bundles that they had for like $5 or whatever. And there was a game called Islands, Non-Places. And there's a whole series of games like this that are just almost purely atmospheric. So the thing that you like in Silk Song is that feeling of going into a world, and the whole raison d'etre of some of these games is like, we're just going to keep giving you that experience. And that was one of the games that appeared on my radar. And another game that was quite good was a turn-based kind of, it felt like a zombie apocalypse, but it was an alien invasion, like a kind of Americana thing called Overland, where you basically go cross country on one of 3 tracks, like the northeastern track, and you just have to figure out how to escape the invasion and rescue people and stay away from thieves and brigands and that sort of thing. And
it's like an Oregon Trail in a way.
Yeah, but like a dystopic Oregon Trail. Well, I mean, even the Oregon Trail is dystopic.
It's very dystopic as well.
Right. Well, hey, great. So if this is the last that you're listening to us tonight, yeah, go ahead to the Acid Horizon Research Commons, enroll in Jeremy's class. You're going to have a lot of fun, and you're going to be absolutely immersed in the world of non-philosophy and Laruelle. And Jeremy, thank you yet again for sitting down with me for maybe like the 5th or 6th time in our lives.
It's always a pleasure. You know, like I'm very much looking forward to this class, and I want to thank you again for this opportunity to work with the Research Commons. I'm looking forward to like starting this first cluster, and we'll see if we get the second cluster soon, because I really want to dive into democracy and non-politics with everybody that might be interested, and we'll see where we go from there.
Excellent. All right. Well, signing off for now. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.